it's an interesting notion of whether the part represents the whole or the whole dictates what's going on for the part. If you conducted a battle system in a role-playing game where all the different player characters are positioned inside the battle some way, and everybody rolls for their various things they're doing, and symbolically the successes that they get sort of go into a victory bank. And the question is, who either reaches the finish line first, or whether you're somehow driving down the threat, of the other side, which is how Jerry does it. But if you do that, then you're basically taking the part and saying that the part's activity becomes the whole, right? The outcome of the whole. Right. Or you have some method of determining how the whole goes, and then that just sets up the circumstances for how dangerous or what are the specifics of the problems that are now facing everybody in it. So the whole is basically creating the environment of the situation. You can go either way in the system. You can also have, like I was talking about, kind of the, screw you, there is a system in place, but it has nothing to do with how you do. You're threshing around with a whole bunch of other morons in the mud. It's not really gonna what happens to you doesn't really make a difference. And the whole question too, does the dramatic notion that an object or a person matters? I mean, it's a romantic feature of history. We get their battle standard. Or, war games are all about this shit. We take out their commander, and all that kind of thing. And it's all militarist enthusiasts are enamored of the idea of these weak points by which you can decapitate or eviscerate or stun, the other side as a collective. In my opinion, this is more of a romance than a reality. But it's a very popular romance, and there are whole war games that are predicated on absolutely nothing but. So do you do that? I mean, do you say, well, I'm going to try and take out, their chief, and the belief that somehow if you take out their chief, everybody goes, oh no, and gives up? It's kind of like, well, that's a nice notion.
Didn't you define the scale of that earlier? Is like we go from being basically inside an ocean storm, like the Circle of Hands battles, versus the Lord of the Rings kind of battle, where the individual action that we focus on,
either directly or symbolically, the battle goes that way. I agree. I mean, I'm getting back to that point in talking about this, but I guess I'm being kind of brutal in my usual, binary self of saying, someone can say, why can't you do both? And then I pick up something heavy and beat them to death.
Well, I'm going to say that the realistic thing is that it is both. Is that it's a complex, it comes from systems theory, complex system. You have parts in a whole interacting, and the behavior of a part can make a big difference to how the system processes something. So, I mean, you can have these moments. I don't think they happen anywhere near as often as the heroic model would say, but the behavior, the influence of a major change on some lesser part can have a big change on the whole outcome.
Greg yesterday pointed out, well, he's read all the Conan stories more recently than I have, but he pointed out how frequently the deciding factor in battles in those is someone just betraying one side or the other, and sort of even when Conan makes his heroic stand and just kills tons of people by himself, it all turns out to not matter because someone
exactly. I mean, Conan loses a lot of battles. I mean, he's exactly, yeah.
But I think the point I think I kind of see there is that you can have this thing where, if you have this thing where individual actions can affect the battle, you can stipulate what aesthetically or what thematically those actions have to be to actually have an effect.
Right. Which ones
Right.
matter? Right.
So you could decide in your Conan style Sorcerer and Sword game, okay, you can stand on the rampart and kill a bunch of people, but it's actually the backstage political maneuver that's going to be
Right.
the impactful thing on the battle, not that. So
Right. So you do have, I'm sorry, Alan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say, what Rod was saying about having decided the battle in advance. In sorcerer terms, I've never played the game, but you could have an overall role to determine what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah,
that's what he did. Yeah.
Don't make a difference. If the players don't make any kind of difference, so
Right.
there might be bonus dice. On
Well,
the side
actually, that
that's
actually
going
would
to
be
win.
pretty easy because you have a degree of victories to work with as a mechanic. You actually have an oppositional force now that is working against them in trying to, the tide went this way. Can we reverse the tide?
Right.
Something
and I think
like
that's
that.
That's what Greg might be planning on doing in his game that he's playing tonight, like possibly right now,
right.
in Belgium.
Mhm.
But he was sort of debating between, okay, well, what he decided in his thing was he's got one of his player characters who's leading this, who's got this army of sort of zealots going up against this army of professional soldiers. And he decided what he was going to do is lay out the conditions at first to the player that, like, look, these guys are going to get cut to pieces. They're not trained unless you sort of figure out some way to balance the scales or bring.
Well, that's where you kind of have your training the peasant scenes, right? That's where you have your trying to figure out how to turn your wretched little hideout into a defended, territory, or stuff like that. We're going to try and I'm thinking of the Seven Samurai, where they have that kind of dedicated process of picking off bandits, not really to reduce their numbers so much, because they still end up with a formidable force at the end to fight, but you reduce their force a little bit, but what you're really doing is things like stealing their guns.
Right.
You're trying to basically whittle down their capacity as a force, and you're setting up your quarters of new fencing that they have to ride through, so they can't attack. They can't ride through the town the way they want to, and you're also, of course, training your peasants to fight with spears as a group.
Right.
So if the point is, there's this kind of cat and mouse for a while before. They get a number of licks on the bandits before the bandits figure out that they have a serious problem on their hands.
Right.
But in the end, it comes down to, all right, we've whittled them down to this much. Now we have kind of a chance.
Right.
Those are all very easily handled in Sorcerer, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, that was by the end of it, we were talking about. The movie's famous for actually showing you. I mean, they actually got a map that you look at in the movie, and they've also got like little circles on the map, which is the number of bandits, and he crosses them out. I mean, how many there are, but I don't remember exactly how many there were. But but by the end of the movie, there were the 4 or 5 remaining samurai, and the against about a round's dozen of bandits or something like that at that point. But I could easily see how that would have been. I mean, it never was a huge battle. It never was armies. It never was planned campaigns. It never was, this grander, vaster environment. Everything in that movie is personal and is conducted personally. So that makes it a little bit easier on the system. But I do see it. I mean, if every one of us had a handful of dice and we looked across all of the covers for your characters, which in Sorcerer and Sword is called past, as you mentioned. If we each had a handful of dice for our past in Sorcerer and Sword, and we looked and said, okay, which of these pasts actually could affect the battle as a whole? And then all you have to do is everybody roll. And that sets the order of these events. We also know which of these actions are targeting one or more characters. Say we have a couple of the commanders in the mix. When their roll comes down, then if it gets through successfully, it'll affect everybody on the opposite side. You're all taking damage from this one way or the other. And then the usual rules apply. I mean, are you going to abort your action? This character might be doing his damnedest to stay alive. This one's trying to steal something, under cover of the battle, right? Running around the battle, trying to steal something. And this other one is bravely fighting to attempt to win the battle. You could use their role as an augment to the commander's role.
Right, the commander role.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to roll faster than the commander so that they're going to give them more dice. Right, stuff like that. But you don't know what order it's going to happen. The fog of war is very much in place in Sorcerer. So you could do that. The question is, how is the battle ultimately determined? Well, you would actually have to have an entity, either another character. That makes it easy if it's another character.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, what is the physicality of winning the battle? What does that mean? Battles are not about slaughtering everybody on the other side. What does it literally mean to win the battle logistically? And then you give that a score. That's what you're actually rolling against. That makes sense. These guys just have to hold out long enough or something. I don't know. There's a couple of different things, that you can do. But it would work, and you wouldn't have to do any special rolls or anything. You would just conduct the actions at their various scales through the regular resolution. It would occur. So there's some really interesting questions about this. But I kind of wish we had better tools, right? I mean, we have a whole bunch of highly individualized games to use for this, but we don't really have like a mental model of it for design purposes or play purposes. I don't have like a bank of thought on this or experience on this to reach into to bring to a game that doesn't have one. I can't look at RuneQuest while we're playing and say, oh no, we're in the middle of this huge battle. How is that going to turn out? Which I really would have liked to do at the end of our RuneQuest game, right? With the Merciful Dawn, right, against the other side. I mean, it was begging for it. It was begging to happen. And I looked at it and I was like, I have no method for this. I could just say, but I'm really, really not liking just saying. So,
yeah.
That's a really good example, because that's where it is falling short in just saying or just deciding this is what I want.
Right.
You would like,
and I don't want
kind of
to
rules of system to just see, okay, what's going to happen.
Yeah, what's the situational dynamics here? And furthermore, I don't want to have a war game in a box and I just say, okay, everybody, put your character sheets aside. We'll go play the war game now. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're not. Alexandra, what's going on?
So I looked for a bunch of games and I found some battle systems, if you want.
Yeah, tell me.
Okay, so it's just a bunch of examples. So the first one I remember is I think it was a playtest. It wasn't never done. It was Apocalypse World Dark Ages.
Right, Vincent never finished that. Yeah.
Yes, it's a shame. So basically, there are situations how to handle the battle, and it's basically that you're rolling on your war skill, probably adding some other situations you're good at, and based on the roll, you choose some extra effects you want. So basically, it's like, okay, you're leading an attack, So you roll and you're choosing from the list. So the options are: you strike hard, aim with +1 harm. You strike unexpectedly. Your enemy cannot defend themselves well. You strike at a particular person. So it's so either your opponent have to protect this person or this person specifically is harmed. You do some kind of maneuvers. You drive your enemy back. So it's basically how to say it, elicitation. What? No, it's a wrong word. Like you're bluffing your opponent
Right.
because people are choosing those options when they don't know what the opponent will choose.
Oh,
So-
okay. So it's a everybody choose now, everybody show.
Yes,